Established in the Central Valley of California, Livingston, or Livingston as it is now called, has been rich in history. As the city celebrates its 100th birthday on September 11, 2022, it has been important to look back on the people and families that made this farming community their homes and what it is today. Whether the early settlers came by wagon train on the Oregon Trail, by steam locomotive on the Southern Pacific, or even by steamboat across the ocean, leaving all one knew behind, one thing was certain, and they all agreed a better future lay ahead. Early times seemed a lot simpler when a handshake was your contract and kids roamed the streets. They played outside and walked miles to school with no fear. It is hard for one to imagine a large city lot selling for just $1.25, or that the current museum was built for just $9,998.49, or even a loaf of bread selling for just 10 cents. The city believes history is important, and so are the people here. In a collaborative effort, the City of Livingston and the University of California, Merced have recorded family stories of many of the longtime Livingston residents, whether it was about their previous generations or fond memories of growing up here. We hope you enjoy the stories of days gone by and help one realize why Livingston is a wonderful place.
Livingston in those days, in the 50s and 60s, were small. Livingston was small. They had 2,500 people, and you knew everybody.
Like, see, my dad even, right where the city park is there, where the ballpark is, my dad actually grew sweet potatoes right across the street there in the late 50s or early 60s. So that shows you how much different the town is than it was then.
And my grandfather was Mayor Merced, and so it just feels like, I've come home being in Livingston.
The country, some of them didn't know where to go, so they would walk in the door over there at the fire department, and I'd see them and I'd just wave my hand and they'd come over, because I knew everybody who lived in the country, and they really appreciated that because they didn't know where to go most of the time.
Well, I just think the people that were here, were here, whatever, the clubs, Rotary, Chamber of Commerce, different clubs like that. And it would be like everybody would join together and put on a festival, put on a whatever. Yeah. It was just a great community to be involved with, which I thought was great.
Livingston was small, it wasn't as big. We knew everybody. You could, go up and down the street and everybody would say hello. They knew you. I know for a fact that myself and now my kids they couldn't get into trouble because before they did what they were going to do, I already knew it. And the same with myself. If I got into any kind of mischief or something, my parents were going to know before I even got home. So that was one good thing about Livingston, that everybody knew everybody and everybody enjoyed everybody.
There's been quite a few changes to downtown, the city hall, and different stores have closed and gone, disappeared, new ones have come in.
Yeah, this was a great little town, 2,000 or 3,000 people. We had sort of one of everything, one bank. This used to be Bank of America, and we had one jewelry store and one clothing store, one hardware store. We had a drugstore with a soda fountain, the old-fashioned soda fountain, where you could get root beer floats and things like that. So I had great memories because the people that owned these stores ran them themselves, and they all lived here. So they were part of the community. It was more than like it is now. There's large corporations that own some of the big stores. This was owned by the people that actually worked in them.
much of what stands out today, Livingston is and was then a small community. I mean, obviously it's grown some, but we haven't grown to the big city, and it was then, as it is now, a small, homey community. A lot of the people, and even more so then, know each other and knew each other by name. I mean, we lived together and worked together, and a lot of the typical everybody knows everybody kind of thing, and that really hasn't changed that much, at least not to any huge degree. And so I would say just the real homey feel of Livingston, as a close community.
I mean, it was interesting growing up in Livingston in the fact that, generational, our parents went to school here, and then we went to school here. And so legacy-wise, it was just being known, teachers that had our parents, and then continuing on to see that. And so growing up, it was a small knit community. I mean, a real downtown type atmosphere.
To Livingston High School, as did Russ's, and our parents both met their partners at Livingston High. Then we met at Livingston High, and then we both taught at Livingston High. We taught our sons, Matthew and Scott, at Livingston High School, and now they both work at Livingston High. And our 3 grandchildren have either gone through or are finishing up at Livingston High School. So that's been a real focus for our family.
We have been involved in the community in our own kind of small way, not in a big way. We were not ever on the school board, we were not on, but this has been our town, and it has been a good place to raise our kids.
Baseball and softball was a big part of our growing up. So on the weekends when we had cousins come over from out of town, there used to be an empty lot across the street. We'd play over there. We'd go to Salma Herndon School. We'd go to the high school. We had weekend plans for softball for a long, long time. And other members of, other relatives or friends would join us, and it was just the expectation. And that was kind of our social thing that we would like to do a lot.
I want to tell you, there was no mothers picking kids up at any school that I can ever remember, ever. My mother took me to school when I was in kindergarten, but everything else was on the bus, and that was part of our kinship. I mean, I'd sit next to Loopy one day, I sit next to somebody from a Mennonite faith the next day. We were all friends for a whole hour.
This is so rich with diversity and ethnic diversity. I think we had 13 different languages spoken in their kindergarten when we first moved here. The Punjab had different dialects, so it was difficult for them to even communicate among themselves, I was told. And a lot of Portuguese, and the Japanese were still here, some of the Japanese Americans. But yeah, many different people here, different ethnic groups, very rich.
I've told people this whole area, I respect it because this is the ground of the Yokut homeland. We're guests here. Their spirits are here. We don't want to forget that.
The first braceros came during the war because there weren't enough workers to do the field work. They brought the first braceros and they walked right in front of the bar. And my mother stood there and cried, and I thought, well, why are you crying? But they were dressed with the huaraches and the white clothes and the sombreros, So, like I say, we saw a lot of history just walking right by us.
This town helped prepare me for what I do. Because in this community, you had to deal with everybody. You had my friends, our friends, and everybody. We're all different ethnicities.
What I kind of missed is there weren't as many Japanese people. My husband was Japanese, but
when we were growing up, there was a lot more Japanese people. There aren't that many here in town anymore. There's more Hispanic people, which is good. I mean, I like that there's Punjabi, and I like that there's all these different people here.
Divided the town more or less. On that side of the tracks, they used to call it the tortilla flats. There were all Hispanic people over there. On the other side of the tracks, it was mixed. Okay.
The biggest thing about Livingston was probably its diversity. At that time, I don't think anybody knew what diversity was, so it was unnoticed. We didn't know. All of our friends. I had red, yellow, black, and white. It didn't make any difference. We were all friends, all on the team. We were all played together, grew up together. So we didn't know anything about it. I think that's something that, and talking to my sisters, that's probably something that stuck with us our whole lives. That we gained from that, from this small community like that, growing up together like that.
This town has always had a bunch of different ethnic groups. And when I was a little boy, and they all arrived at different times, And so when I was a little boy was when the Sikh community started arriving. And one of my, when you're a really little kid, you have these little 5-second memory flashes. I still have it in my mind. I was walking down Joseph Street with my sister, and we saw this man, and he was wearing, it looked to me like a dress, and then he had these shoes that had these curly things, and I was probably 5 years old, and I was just like, what is that? Well, he was this man from India, and those were just the shoes that he wore. So I just remember, when you're a kid, nothing seems strange to you. It's just like that's where you grew up. But as I left here and moved to other places, I realized how lucky we were to, I was hearing, Spanish and Portuguese, hearing all these different languages anywhere I would go in the town,
Daniel Baldwin Chedester, a rise by wagon train from Kansas in 1862, and was the first white settler to Livingston. Not escaping hardship, he experienced the loss of their 2-year-old child en route. In 1868, William Jackson Little built the first grain warehouse. He held the deed to 2,500 acres where Livingston City sits today. In 1871, Edward Jerome Olds quit his job with the Central Pacific Railroad and opens up the first business in Livingston. It was a few boards put together and tarps to serve as a saloon and a clothing store. In 1872, the first plate map was filed for the development of 80 huge blocks where lots were sold for just $1.25. The town was to be named Livingstone, after the famous English explorer to Africa. In 1872, an election was held in hopes to make Livingstone the county seat, failing by 200 votes. In 1873, a petition was filed for the Livingstone post office, and during the filing, the E was left off inadvertently, and the town was then spelt Livingston. Livingston experienced growth as business began to cater to the railroad as it opened through Livingston in 1872. The early 1900s, Livingston acquired more business and farms as water was brought in via the canals by Merced irrigation. Churches found homes in Livingston. The Japanese developed Yamato colony and started many family farms. The Portuguese brought in the expertise in dairy farming, while Hispanic families joined the workforce in Livingston by running farms and ranches. In 1911, the city had its first volunteer fire department, established by Charles Robert Davis Burt, who also became the first fire chief. Conveniences like the automobile and the telephone helped make Livingston life easier. The city had its own newspaper, the Chronicle, which started in 1909 by Peter Higgins and continues today through McClatchy Newspapers out of Merced. The Chronicle newspaper office still stands today downtown Livingston as a storefront. In 1914, World War I drew the community closer together as many of the Livingston sons served in the armed services, some gave all. In 1922, Livingston filed for incorporation and held its first election, and on September 11, 1922, this small town was officially a city. With the election also came the very first city council, in which Charles Ottman became its first mayor. Many things happened this year, such as the first park establishment on 3rd Street and was named Hammett Park, later in the 40s to be renamed Memorial Park in honor of the Livingston veterans. With the World War II and the bombing of Pearl Harbor in December of 1941, many of the Japanese community in Livingston were taken to internment camps from 1942 to 1945. Livingston found many things for their leisure time, which included the Court Theater for movies, the Livingston Hall Association for dances, social events, and family gatherings. The ladies would gather for gardening and Job's daughters. Card games were played, kids rode their bikes until dark, boys were active as Boy Scouts, and swimming took place in the Merced River as well as local canals. Livingston has been steadily growing since the first available census in the 1930s, which listed a population of 803. In 2019, Livingston's population was 14,896. Livingston continues to grow and is a desirable place for young families to raise their children. Many have left Livingston for various reasons, returning as Livingston is home, and home is where the heart is. I hope you enjoy this video, and I encourage you to visit the Livingston Historical Society at Main and C Streets in downtown Livingston. The Chronicle will be online for use in midsummer of 2022 with a link on the City of Livingston's website.